A judge has ruled that a gender-critical lawyer was banned by her vet because of her views. Allison Bailey, a retired criminal defence barrister and co-founder of the LGBT Alliance, sued her local vet practice in the first case of its kind. The practice insisted that Bailey was thrown out for being rude to staff, but the judge rejected this and said that she had faced unlawful discrimination due to her views. Now, to discuss this with us, I'm really pleased to welcome the campaign lead for Sex Matters, Fiona McAnena. Hi, Fiona. Thank you for coming in tonight. I thought this story was absolutely fascinating because it's almost the first time that this kind of case has been brought. We've seen other discrimination cases, but not quite by a business against a customer. And I'm sure that Sex Matters have seen lots and lots of different cases. What's your view on this particular one?
Well, this is, as you say, a very important case. It shouldn't have to happen because it's 4 years ago that the founder of Sex Matters, Maya Forstater, won her case, which proved that gender-critical beliefs, believing that sex is real and mutable and important, and sometimes you have to be able to recognize that, she established that those beliefs are worthy of respect in a democratic society. And so you cannot refuse service to someone just because you don't like their beliefs. And yet here we are 4 years on, and that's what Allison Bailey has demonstrated happened to her. We shouldn't have to go to court, but I think it's clear that we are going to have to go to court to enforce the law as it stands. And that's why this case is very important. As you say, it's the first of its kind.
It is really interesting, isn't it, that there seems to be no end to this. Somebody asked me today when I was discussing this with them, how is this going to end? And my worry, Fiona, is that because we've now got universities and schools completely indoctrinated, that when all of those young people come out the other end and are going to be the managers and the enforcers of the future, there's almost no end in sight.
Well, it's a huge risk for organisations because if they continue to get the law wrong, and the more that cases go to court and are demonstrably correct, like Allison Bailey's case was, the more it's going to cost businesses. And I'm inclined to think that on the one hand, you have these young people, or maybe not so young people, with their virtue signalling, believing that they can police our beliefs and that they shouldn't serve people who believe something they think is unpleasant. And on the other hand, you have the law and it's going to cost them money. And I think it's only when it really starts to cost businesses money that organizations will take it seriously. And I'm pretty sure that's where we're headed. This is the first, but I'm quite sure it won't be the last.
Interesting. Connie?
Fiona, will this ruling set a precedent for other businesses? Well, should they be more scared? For example, in pubs, where I know I've been in situations where, or been at events where people behind the bar have refused to serve a group of women because they could overhear what they were saying. Will this sort of set a precedent so that won't be allowed to happen anymore?
Well, two parts to your question, Connie. Should it be allowed to happen anymore? Has the law been established that they should not do this? Yes, it has. Not by this case, but by the Forstater case, because that was a second-tier decision. And that was all of 4 years ago. And yet the word doesn't seem to have filtered out. And I think that organisations are really letting, the umbrella organisations that provide training, that provide guidance, are letting businesses down by not making this clear to them. So this case, because it's a county court case, it doesn't set a precedent, but it does mean that anyone else who experiences something like this can feel more confident in writing to a supplier or a customer, a service provider, and saying you've broken the law. And we know of a number of cases where that has happened, and the behind the scenes, the legal threat has been enough to make the service provider back down. There have been venues, for example, that women have booked to speak at that have said, we don't want you coming, now we know what you want to talk about. That's clearly not okay, because what they're talking about is a perfectly normal mainstream belief, and they've been made to back down. But you don't always know when you've been discriminated against. This is why I think Allison Bailey was very brave, because they said some really unpleasant things about her, and she had to be prepared to face that in court and have all of that aired about her. Unfortunately, the judge decided that, on balance, that was not the reason why they got rid of her, and that she hadn't been particularly unpleasant. But it's quite a risky thing to do, to go to court.
So this is interesting, Fiona, isn't it? Because we've also got Angela Rayner's employment law bill going through, where there is some suggestion in there that people will have to stop others from talking about things like gender critical beliefs in order to protect their employees. Do you see that being a barrier that might, make Allison Bailey's case nonsensical?
I think it's potentially a very serious problem. It depends whether it is going to align with the law as it stands, as it's been demonstrated, which is that there's nothing problematic about talking about the reality of sex when that matters. For example, the need for single-sex provision of facilities in some cases. But if it's going to be very loosely interpreted as simply being if someone's feelings are hurt, well, then we could be in for all sorts of problems. So we have to see how it's going to be framed. But it cannot be that a belief that's been held at the appeal tribunal, so at a precedent-setting level, to be entirely mainstream and appropriate and lawful, can then be judged to be off limits in the workplace.
Interesting. Will?
Fiona, this is obviously a very troubling instinct within this particular business, but I'm interested in the broader culture amongst corporates and small to medium-sized businesses in the country more generally. Following the Cass review and the Supreme Court decision, have you and the organisation noticed some sort of a return to normalcy amongst the business world, or has it still got that level of ideological capture that unfortunately we got so used to in that 2020 to 2023-4 period?
Yeah, I think there's a massive schism. So on the one hand, we've seen some organisations come out and state clearly the law is clear, the judgment was clear, there's nothing complicated about it. We've known forever that humans come in two kinds, male and female, and we can pretty much always tell. And so we had some very good results very quickly, like the Football Association, the Scottish Football Association, the Cricket Board, dumping what had been a very unfair and in some cases dangerous policy for women, where they let males who said they felt like women into the women's category. So we saw some quick changes, but now we're seeing an awful lot of resistance. We're seeing a lot of people saying, they're not clear, they're waiting for more guidance, and they really shouldn't, because they are all currently operating outside the law, if that's what they do. And, we ourselves have a number of cases that we are looking at to try and help people understand that they really shouldn't be waiting for someone to tell them what the law is. That judgment from the Supreme Court was crystal clear. It only told us what we all knew already. And frankly, when you poll people, everybody thinks that's what is normal and real, and they don't really need legal guidance to tell them that, for example, you should have men's and women's toilets at work, and perhaps you should have a unisex option as well. So the answer to your question is we've seen some progress, but I've been a bit taken aback at how many sensible, intelligent people, including law firms and big employers, are sitting on their hands and saying, let's wait and see.
Fiona, I just want to jump in Trey here. I mean, do you ever envisage a future where people with genuine gender dysphoria generally get the compassion that they clearly deserve, but also there's going to be a balance in terms of the way society, like what will it take to strike that balance where the disorder is acknowledged, but it's not necessarily abused by anyone? What would that take in your opinion? Because clearly it's going to take more than just legislation or court rulings.
I think it would take the ability to have an honest conversation. And it's the fact that gender critical beliefs and the recognition that everyone has human rights and we have to be able to weigh up what are the best solutions to meet everyone's needs. It's the fact that that's been deemed off limits and been called hate speech, and that we had no debate, encouraged by the likes of Stonewall. That's why we are where we are. So I think what it will take is for organizations to stop condemning people who want to talk about the reality of humans being male and female, and that sometimes that matters. When we can have that dialogue, then we can problem solve. And there's room for empathy for all kinds of people. It's frustrating that all those people who talk about great empathy for example, the trans-identifying male players who can't play women's football anymore, they really don't show much empathy for all the women and girls who have not been able to have fair football, some of whom have been injured, some have dropped out. You'll remember there were girls suspended for pointing out that there was a man on the pitch. So empathy needs to, if we're going to make policies based on empathy, it needs to be spread around fairly to everyone.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, Fiona? Because as a doctor, I went to a conference about 18 months ago in London, which was to discuss the benefits and risks of hormone replacement in children. It was the only conference in my entire career that I had to be escorted into by the police. So violent was the crowd outside. And as you say, this ability to speak freely and discuss, a group of doctors discussing harms or benefits of a drug is bizarre.
Yeah, and it's a good illustration, isn't it, that when we're told that we have to show empathy, and I appreciate that's not what anyone here is saying, but the way we make good policy is not by creating a sacred class of people whose needs have to be put ahead of everyone else. It's by actually looking at the evidence, weighing up the pros and cons, and actually the evidence is that cross-sex hormones and certainly puberty blockers are not the kind or empathetic or responsible thing to do in many cases where someone thinks that's what they want. The doctors really don't just prescribe to patients what the patient asks for. Exactly. So ironically, the push to have empathy for trans people and to center their needs and in some cases affirm their identities risks being unkind, not just to the rest of us, but to those people as well. And until we can get beyond that push to say you must be kind, and that means don't say anything that a trans person doesn't want to hear, then I think it's going to be very hard to reset so that everyone's rights are properly protected. And I include trans identifying people in that.
Amazing. Fiona, thank you so much. That was just so interesting.